Hi, I'm Mike Duggan. I've been teaching restorative dentistry for over 32 years now and to over 6,000 dentists. This video shows how I do it. Real-time, mannequin-based, hands-on, point of view, and patient real. If you are a pre-dental student, an aspiring teacher, an international dentist, join me at Duggan Oral Design, dugganoraldesign.com. Okay, alright, so the ball burnisher is very helpful here. So your depth cut on the mid-facial is pretty good. You need a little bit more axe reduction at the depth cut here. And this should be closer to the adjacent tooth. So make another depth cut really close to the adjacent tooth here. But at the bottom, you're getting, some of them are getting the right amount of axe reduction. So your taper should be like this, so you're sort of getting the right taper here, and then you're over tapering in some other places. So try to keep the taper uniform around that facial surface. And what's happening over here? What's going on here?
I think
I'm just not sure what you're doing there. When you make the chamfer, just keep the margin near the gingiva all the time. You're never going to be way up here. It's going to force you to hit the adjacent tooth. So, pretty heavy over here, huh?
Yeah.
Look down the wall with me. So your axe reduction here is almost 2 millimeters.
Where? On axial? Proximally?
Yeah, on the mesial buccal.
Okay.
So that's a good depth cut. And it's not bad over here, but then for some reason here you really cut deep. And that's reasonable. Let's check the taper. So here's the taper you want, right like this. So see how much you're over tapering? Use this exact taper when you make the depth cuts. And the depth cut should be 1 millimeter above the gingiva. So way down here. Now the good news is, when you redo the depth cut, at the right angle and at the right level, then a lot of this is going to disappear. You might end up being okay. But again, when we make the depth cuts, stay closer to the gingiva. When you angle the shoulder, you're going to be very close to the gingiva all the way around here. Okay? And make sure when you make your depth cut, you lean the burr toward the axis. Alright, so make the depth cuts again, especially the facial one, and make it closer to the gingiva and keep the taper under control. Okay? The taper, matching the middle third.
Okay.
So match the middle third, there's the angle you want, and make the depth cut. 1 millimeter above the gingiva. And 1 millimeter wide at the bottom. Then you connect together. But watch your tapers. Make sure you have the burr leaning toward the axis when you're in each area. Now when you connect together, you keep the shoulder about this level, and it's probably going to look much better. Okay, so I'll do the mesial side for you so you can see. So here's the taper you want. So now we're going to connect together from this depth cut to this one. But stay just a millimeter above the gingiva, okay? And make sure you have the right taper. So here's the taper that you want. So that's the taper that you're going to use all the way down there. Now, you still do have, you over-tapered and over-reduced up in this area, but if your depth cut had been closer to the gingiva, it would have come out much better. So again, make those depth cuts just the way you want. Alright, so anyway, now we're getting a shoulder from here to here. We evaluate it by looking down the wall in the mirror. That's the only way to see what you've done. Then connect it together here, then you can continue. Yeah, well, if you haven't been using the ball burnisher, you were in too much of a hurry. Remember how many times I used the ball burnisher? Over and over and over. You can see me doing it over and over and over. So let's look down here. So your axe reduction, look at the monitor, so you can see. So the axe reduction at the shoulder here is pretty good. Over here, not enough. Over here, not too bad. Over here, not enough. Okay, and the taper on the mid-facial. Okay, so your taper, pretty close. You're pretty far from the gingiva here, though, aren't you? You're like 2 millimeters or more from the gingiva. So once you've done your 3 depth cuts and join them together, keep the shoulder near the gingiva, about 1 millimeter away. Then when you angle the shoulder, then it comes out better. Now when you're coming to the proximal, look at the size of that ski jump.
So I was like not quite sure how should I like.
Always keep the end of the burr at the margin.
Okay.
Always keep the end of the burr at the margin. That's the key to the whole deal right there. So I need the 877. So you have an unusual burr here. This guy right here is... Oh, I'm sorry, that is 877. It looked like it was tapered for some reason. Okay, so remember when you're coming through the proximal, keep the end of the burr there at the surface. See, you're getting a ski jump and an undercut and damaging the adjacent tooth.
Right.
So look along the wall. Now this is easy when you're looking along the wall in the mirror. You can see where the end of the burr is at the surface. You can see the margin near the gingiva. And you can see the relationship to the adjacent tooth. That's all you needed to do. Then you can come through this way, but don't let the end of the burr get inside the tooth. Keep it at the margin and keep the margin closer to the gingiva. Okay, so then we can go ahead. Again, see, you're leaning the burr away from the axis instead of toward the axis. And then you can bring the chamfer around and let it join the shoulder, but first you have to angle the shoulder. So get some more axe reduction here and here at the shoulder. Angle the shoulder. Don't skip step 3 before you do anything else. And then come back and do the chamfers again with the end of the burr at the margin. Get a little bit. Your incisor reduction, you can do a little bit more. As I said, your taper is pretty good. Secondary plane, not too bad. We do the lingual fossa, you're going to reduce the cingulum down to about here. You're going to leave about 1.5 millimeters wall height right here. But, you know, make sure you've got the chamfer and the axe reduction done well there. When you have that done well, then you can reduce the cingulum until you get the right wall height here. But when you make the chamfers really heavy, it makes it much more difficult.
Yeah.
All right, so keep going on that one, and then you can start on the central anytime you want, and change all the preps except for number 30. Okay?
So are we looking at 30?
Not yet. Yep, we will. Oh, okay. Oops. And right here. Okay, well, taper is going to be a big thing. So it took me about, maybe half of a millisecond to notice that the taper was a problem. So 837. So we always make sure we have the right taper. Anytime we're doing a crown prep, first make sure you have the perfect taper, then reduce until you get the margin that you want. So here's the taper, middle third, right here. See the way you're leaning outward? That won't work. So there's the taper. So use that taper right down to the shoulder. Make sure you have the axe reduction you want at the shoulder. That's okay. Make another depth cut over here. So your taper here, you got a little bit of a problem with, so make sure you have it leaning axially. Now you can take the taper here and bring that taper all the way around into the embrasure here. I'm going to get a little more axe reduction right there, make that shoulder closer to a millimeter reduction. So now we're getting a relatively uniform shoulder from here to here. Then angle the shoulder. Don't forget step 3, angle the shoulder. Right to the axial wall, and then look this way and angle it to the axial wall. you have to test the shoulder to make, oh, where's the ball burnisher? Over here? Yeah, we have to test the shoulder to make sure that it's angled. So we slide the ball burnisher down here, it slides off. Over here, see, it's not sliding off.
Yeah.
So you didn't angle the shoulder here, but
So
here
how
you
can
did.
we do in the proximal area? How can
Well, that's what we're about to get to. Yeah. There will not be a shoulder in the proximal area, it's a chamfer in the proximal area. Okay, but look at the facial reduction now. See the difference between what I did
Yeah.
and what you did?
Yeah.
So when I make the secondary plane here, you're more than a millimeter under reduced axially right up in here.
Okay. I was scared, you know. That's
You got to get the taper.
Yeah.
You should be
So,
most
and
afraid not to have the
I
right
one more
taper.
question.
Sure, many.
Like, what I don't understand what we are doing the singular side.
Okay, we'll get there. We just have to do one step at a time. Okay, so I have a nice little chamfer burr. Okay, so when we're doing the axe reduction from the lingual side, again, all we have to do is make sure the end of the burr stays at the margin. So over here, you got a ski jump because you're too heavy, and over here, it looks like you might have had a ski jump and then you corrected it by almost beveling that margin. Let's just lean the burr toward the axis. Keep the margin near the gingiva. Keep the end of the burr near the keep the end of the burr at the margin. Now just follow around until it joins the shoulder on the facial side. But I'm going to have to do it. You have to fix the shoulder on the facial side, but on the mesial side, I'm looking through like this. Since I already got the shoulder done, we can bring the chamfer from the lingual. But again, keep it close to the gingiva and make sure the end of the burr is always, always, always at the margin, at the surface. So now we're getting a more uniform 1/2 millimeter chamfer. And then that chamfer will join the shoulder smoothly because I already angled the shoulder the same as the chamfer. So then we blend them together, and now the mesial side is looking pretty good. Okay, so fix the distal side. Then when you want to do the cingulum, first of all, make sure you have a good taper for the lingual reduction. Then start by reducing this until you get about 1.5 millimeters wall height right there. Then come up to the incisal edge. Then come down the marginal edge. Then come down the marginal edge. Then back and forth in between here and here. So use the football burr for that. You don't need to make little steps and so forth.
So I'm okay.
So yeah, once you've come up the middle, then you take your football burr and come down this way. And so you're making the marginal edge concave from the incisal edge here down to the cingulum there. Then you can go back and forth in between like this. Do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so let's check the axe reduction on the facial. So right here, you're about 0.5 or 0.4. So you need to make more of a depth cut here. And over here, you're about 0.6. You need to make a better depth cut there. Over here, you're about, what, 0.7? 0.75, something like that. So you're not a full millimeter yet anywhere. So make sure you get that. And then the taper, this is the taper you want, matching the middle third of the adjacent tooth. So you're a little bit over tapered. See the difference?
Yes.
So that's easy to fix because when you change your taper, you can get, well, this is the 878K012. So, you know, it's useful to have this to practice with, but that is not the ideal burr for doing these preps. Okay? So 014 is the one you most want to use. Okay, so anyway, here's the taper you want. So make a depth cut right like this. So choose your taper, reduce until you get the shoulder. So now at the bottom we have a 1 millimeter shoulder, and I'll do the same thing on the embrasures. So make sure it's leaning axially above the gingiva by about 1 millimeter and reduce axially there. Same thing over here. So make sure it's 1 millimeter above the gingiva and then reduce axially until you get 1 millimeter axial reduction at the shoulder. Okay, so now we can connect together from here around to there. So use the same taper that I just did. I'm going to check the width of the shoulder. Let's see. Okay, so that's the angle we want right here. Get a little closer to the gingiva. Then we can angle the shoulder gingially, like this. So do all 3 steps. So you can do the distal side, but we ended up with a little too much right here. When I uprighted that wall and got rid of the taper, I got a little bit more heavy chamfer than I wanted to. But over here we're about 1 millimeter now, and over here you'll be 1 millimeter as soon as you connect it together. But you see the difference between the tapers here and what you did here, okay? So what you have, this angle is kind of like the secondary plane. So I would do the incisal part at this angle. So gingivaly about like this, and the incisal part about like that. But see, you got a little bit over tapered, but again, when you're over taper, a lot of times people get a weak shoulder at the bottom. Okay, now your chamfer is super heavy and you're not leaning the burr at the right angle. So let's go back, and we can use either of the chamfer burrs. I'll use 877. So make sure you have the burr leaning toward the axis. Make sure the end of the burr is always at the margin. So see the way here, you're leaning the burr away from the axis. Here's the axis. You're leaning the burr away from it, and then the end of your burr is going inside the tooth. So you're tending to get a ski jump and an undercut. So lean it toward the axis, and make sure you always see the end of the burr at the margin. Keep the margin near the gingiva, especially as you go into the proximal contact. You see over here, you're leaning the burr this way, so of course you're hitting the adjacent tooth. But again, when you use the mirror, then you'll be able to see the angle, the taper, the chamfer, and everything. Now when we look along the wall here, just make sure you see the end of the burr at the margin. If the end of the burr is at the surface of the tooth, at the margin, then you'll always get the perfect chamfer. So you're better through the proximal. Be careful about hitting the adjacent tooth though. And at this point, you're getting a little bit of a ski jump right here. So if I slide the ball burnisher down, it doesn't quite slide off the chamfer. So I'm going to hold the gingiva down and correct the shape of the chamfer. Just get that nice angulation right there. And join the shoulder smoothly. That's what we're looking for. Okay, so again, you probably need to taper more right in through here. But you see, when you're that deep, it's hard to change the taper because your chamfer is really, really heavy here, isn't it? Now over here, lean the burr toward the axis and come back through this area, come back through the contact. Don't lean the burr into the adjacent tooth like that. Just follow through there. Then you can do the lingual fossa reduction. Actually, before you do the proximal, well, let me see. I'd probably do a little more reduction on the incisal. So do more on the facial reduction, come around the distal side, then do the lingual fossa reduction. Then you can start on the central. And again, as I said earlier, there should be one prep on your typodont, and that's number 30. So change all the rest of them. Okay. Go. Ah, okay. When you use the light, keep the light as much as you can right over your head. Then you won't have so many shadows. Okay, your margin's really far from the gingiva, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we want to have it so that after you've angled the shoulder, it's close to the gingiva. But right now your extruduction is close to 1 millimeter, a little bit more. Over here, yeah, you don't have quite enough of a depth cut right in this area. The taper is pretty close. Okay, so what I would probably do is go back and redo the depth cuts a little bit. This is the 878K012. So you'll probably either want to use the 1.4 or the 877.
Okay.
Yeah,
for the
they
chamfers.
use the
Yeah, it's a small
round
burr.
yeah.
So it makes a little tiny chamfer, and it's easier to get a ski jump.
No, and I accidentally used the wrong burr to cut between the proximal.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to make another depth cut closer to the gingiva right here. So your angle is pretty close, but let's go closer to the gingiva. When you do the proximal depth cut, for example, over here, we're going to get into the embrasure, but make a depth cut that's actually in the embrasure, and then check the axe reduction at the bottom of that depth cut. And if you're happy and you have the levels the way you want, then you can start connecting together. Then when you have a uniform shoulder, then you can go ahead and angle the shoulder gingerly. And that, once you have the angled shoulder, then when the chamfer comes through from the lingual, you have a place for it to join. So you can just sort of touch up what's happening over here on the distal side, or on the musical side, but keep the margin closer to the gingiva in this area.
Got it.
Okay, now for the proximal, we can just use the 877. That makes life really easy. And look along the wall. See, look how much tapering you're doing here. And you have a very weak chamfer. So probably what's happening is you're trying to do it looking this way.
Yeah.
So that's called looking at the wall. We can't do preps by looking at the wall. You have to look along the wall. So you can see the taper and the gingival position and the size of the chamfer. How deep we are axially. So we're always looking along the wall. So the mirror will allow us to look along the wall any place we want. You see what you did here? You leaned the burr toward the adjacent tooth.
Yeah.
You let the end of the burr get inside the tooth, so you got a big ski jump there. So to fix the ski jump, we have to come back with the burr and keep the end of the burr at the margin all the way around there. Then we can fix that. But we're having to go a little bit subgingival in order to do it, huh? But at least now we don't have an obvious ski jump. And again, look along the wall so you can see the taper while you're doing it. Okay? So practice using the mirror to look along the wall in every area. You might have 6 or 8 different directions to look, so that you're always looking along whatever wall you're cutting. Then you won't end up over tapering. You'll keep the margin closer to the gingiva, and everything will work out a little better. Okay, so once you finish the axe reduction all the way around, then do the cingulum coming up and then down the marginal ridges and then make the fosse. Then you can start on the central. And so, yeah, you're the only person that actually changed teeth. Amazing. So yeah, I'll be checking 30 pretty soon. Okay, all right. Take a look at the canine. Okay. So we're going to try to make sure that we have the.
This one.
I'll use this one for working on the chamfer. So the 877 in the proximal area is where we're going to be really looking. So again, keep the margin closer to the gingiva and then keep the end of the burr at the margin when you come through there. So look the way I am so you can see what you're doing and you can see where you are gingerly. So you're hitting the adjacent tooth like this. Okay? If you're looking the way I am, you'll never hit the adjacent tooth like that. Just make sure you keep the end of the burr right there at the margin. And see over here, you're really heavy. So make sure you see the end of the burr at the margin at the surface. all the time. So I'm looking along the wall there, I'm looking along the wall here. Okay, so the mirror makes it possible to get this totally under control. And then make sure the chamfer and the shoulder join smoothly. So I have the end of the burr at the margin of the chamfer and bring it onto the margin of the shoulder. Then that works out just fine. Nice smooth connection. Okay, so here your extraduction is not enough. Here you have a 1 millimeter shoulder, here you have a 1 millimeter shoulder, but here it's not a millimeter. So again, we evaluate it looking down the wall and compare the shoulder to the size of the ball burnisher. That's still 0.5. So what you want to do, we go back to the shoulder diamond typically, but also check your taper. See the taper?
It's a little too tapered. It's too tapered.
Yeah, it's over tapered. So let's just take this taper and go back and make more shoulder at the bottom. Try to make it a nice uniform. The best we can do is make a nice uniform shoulder from here all the way around to there. Now it looks pretty good, huh? Okay. Now incisally, you're probably a little bit over reduced. And then lingually, do you have some clearance? You don't have enough clearance on the mesial side. So I'm going to do the lingual with the football burr. Come up this way, then come down this way, all the way to the single, and then go back and forth in between. Anyway, this one's coming along now, but those are the things that really needed to be taken care of. Look how uniform the extraduction is at the shoulder now, from here to here. That's what we're looking for, and in order to see that, we have to look down the wall. Now, you did get over tapered toward the top. That made it a little more difficult. Okay, so back to the 837 burr, and go ahead and do one of the centrals. But we want to rotate this tooth around so it's back in the arch again. It's a little closer, but we also want to make sure all the screws are tight. Anyway, we can do. So lean the burr toward the axis. We always have the burr leaning toward the axis. So look what I have to do here. I'm going to lean the burr toward the axis and re-prep this entire wall all the way down to the gingival area, and then lean the burr toward the axis and re-prep this whole wall. So now we have convergent mesial distal walls. Okay? But whenever anybody leans the burr away from the axis, the end of the burr tends to go inside the tooth, and then you get the ski jump. So you got an undercut and a ski jump. So again, we take the end of the burr and come around here, put the end of the burr at the surface, and re-prep our chamfer, whatever we need to do, so we don't have a ski jump. Now, again, the chamfer should always be a little bit above the gingiva anyway. But make sure that you always see the end of the burr at the margin, right there. Okay? If it's not there, if it's inside the tooth, you're making a ski jump. Stop. Okay? Alright, so, and of course your taper on the facial. Taper is going to be a big issue for you, won't it?
Yeah.
So the taper on the facial, let's go back and look at the 837 diamond. So here's the 837 diamond. There's the taper that we want, right? Mm-hmm. Right? So you're pretty good up here, but look at the bottom. We want this taper all the way to the shoulder. You've got to get this taper matching the middle third of the adjacent tooth all the way down to the shoulder. And then make that shoulder 1 millimeter above the gingiva. And make the extraduction at the shoulder 1 millimeter as measured by the ball burnisher. So now we got a shoulder that's 1 millimeter wide, and we got rid of that huge undercut. Okay? You lean the burr away from the axis, you're going to get a huge undercut. You had it mesial distally and facially. So this is the taper we wanted. So I've fixed it on the distal side, but look at what you did here. So it's very much under-reduced in this area because you had the wrong taper at the bottom. Mm-hmm. You've got to get the right taper all the way down to the shoulder, and then You can put a secondary plane up here, but we only have 2/3 like this and 1/3 like that. There's no angle like that.
Okay.
That makes it so you can't make the crown. Okay. So now your axe reduction at the shoulder is pretty heavy here, isn't it?
Yeah.
We only want it to be 1 millimeter wide, so this is okay. But again, that's why we make depth cuts, so we have total control over the axe reduction at the shoulder. Now the end of your burr,
It's burned.
yeah, so we'll unburn it a little bit. And now we clean that up a bit. But we got to make sure that we're angling the shoulder. So we look along the wall like this so you can see the angle that you're doing while you're doing it. So that's what we always do. But angle the shoulder all the way to the margin. But huge shoulder there, right? Now look at the lingual. You're leaning your burr away from the axis. When you're making the chamfer, you're leaning the burr in the wrong taper. So the key thing is to make sure you have the right taper.
We have to give conversions like we were.
Always, 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 always. Without conversions, there's no crown prep. Okay, the lab can't deal with a prep that's diverging incisally or occlusally. The lab can't deal with that. The lab can't do anything. So it has to be converging incisally or occlusally, so then you can make the crown. Okay, but look at the lingual. See, here's the axis. Lean the burr toward the axis. You're leaning the burr away from the axis. But, you know, that's a matter of looking at it in the direction that allows you to see what you're doing. So the mirror is going to be very helpful for you. So look this way so you can see the taper and also see the end of the burr at the margin. But you can also see where the margin is gingivally. But you're very deep subgingival here. See that?
Okay.
You're going really deep subgingivally. So you have an undercut, a ski jump, and you're very much subgingival. So those are three things that you desperately are trying to avoid. All right? So we might be able to get rid of the undercut, but the chamfer on the lingual is going to be very, very heavy. But again, I'm looking along the wall so I can see what I need to see. That's the key to the whole thing right there, is making sure you see what you need to see.
Yeah, like, but when I'm putting bird lingually, I can't see the bird. I don't know.
Am I seeing the burr?
Yeah.
If I can see it, you can see it. But see, I know how to use the mirror. I'm comfortable using the mirror. You're not. But you have to be. So get comfortable using the mirror. Look this way and make sure you see that you're leaning the burr axially. Look this way, make sure you see that you're leaning the burr axially and where you are gingivally. Everything that you need to see, you can see. You just have to use the mirror wisely. Okay? Alright, so redo the facial reduction. Do the mesial side of the facial to match what I did on the distal side of the facial. And again, look this way so you can see how big a difference there is between this and this. And get rid of all that excess up there. Then do your lingual fossa reduction up through here. Okay? And again, whenever we're doing axe reduction, we're looking along the wall. And you're not doing that at all. You're trying to look in some really strange direction so you can't see anything that you need to see. Okay? So if you want to do a wall, if you want to reduce axially, look along the wall, see the taper, see the gingival position, see the chamfer, and make sure you keep the end of the burr at the surface all the time, and it will always work out great. But you have to see that you're doing it right. If you can't see what you're doing, don't do it. Okay? Just don't do anything if you can't see what you're doing. Experiment around a little bit until you find the direction to look, until you start to see what you need to see. But, you know, there are three things you have to see. The taper, the axial reduction, and the gingival position. And you could not see any of those three.
Axial reduction.
Axial reduction, end of the burr at the margin. Taper, leaning toward the axis.
I can see axial reduction here.
Okay, three things you need to see. The taper, the axial reduction, that is the end of the burr at the margin, and then where the margin is gingivally. Those three things. So, for example, over here, you clearly couldn't see the axial reduction because the end of the burr is deep, deep, deep inside the tooth. It should have been here. Over here, you couldn't see the taper because you're leaning the burr totally away from the axis of the tooth. and gingival, you're way down subgingival. So those are all three things you must see, and I don't think you saw any of them.
No, I'm not seeing
Well, then
that.
don't do the prep.
Okay.
Okay, so figure out how to use the mirror wisely so that you can actually see those three things, and your preps are going to get way, way better.
Okay.
Okay? All right, so finish up that central. We're going to do a premolar in a little bit. Change some teeth so that we have a chance to do that. Okay, you don't have any premolars that we can use, so get some teeth changed. Okay? Okay. There's a canine. Oops, there's a canine.
Sorry.
Brought my own this time. Canine and a central too. Now, yeah, the axe reduction is getting a lot better now, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You still have a huge ski jump right here.
Yeah. I forgot to do it. It was from last time. I didn't do anything to that canine.
Yeah. So, do you want to see if you can fix it?
Yeah.
So when you fix it, keep the end of the burr at the margin right here, and just drop the margin gingially.
Okay.
Now, you're doing much better over here, and you got some convergence mesial distally. The axe reduction at the shoulder, good here, but not enough here, and not quite enough over here. So try to get a nice uniform 1 millimeter. Okay. Let's see the taper compared to the adjacent tooth. Okay, your taper is pretty close. You're in the corner, you're leaning a little bit outward. So make sure you're leaning axially even all the way around the corner. And then your shoulder, this would be horizontal. This is a reasonable angle. So you're a little bit too steep on the shoulder. But we can live with that. The good news is that you've got some angulation, but make the shoulder a little heavier in these areas while you're getting the good taper, and then angle the shoulder all the way into the embrasures here. So when the chamfer comes through, it'll join the shoulder smoothly. Almost getting a little ski jump thing over there. When you're doing the lingual reduction, don't look this way. Because, if I'm looking this way, I can't see the taper. Look this way so you can see the taper.
Oh.
Right? So we always look along the wall.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Whatever wall we're doing, we're looking along the wall. If you look from the lingual, you can only see one of the three things that we must see. All right, so you can try to fix that ski jump real quickly, and then go ahead and see if you can finish this one up.
One more question. So I always end up cutting the cingulum.
Yeah, because you over tapered.
Yeah.
Because you didn't look in the right direction when you're doing that. So you just cut the cingulum all the way. You see, super over tapered into the cingulum. Okay. You probably want to reduce the margin ridge a little bit more here and here. And I would probably reduce more down here too, because this wall typically, even though it's over tapered, it's probably a little too tall. So I think you need to do more reduction in this area. That'll probably make it look a little bit better. But yeah, when you have a really heavy chamfer and a really over tapered, that means you're looking in the wrong direction. So again, figure out, okay, what do I need to see? And then make sure you look in the direction so you can see those things.
Yes.
All right, cool.
I just need to work on my mirror thing, like I feel.
Yeah, but it's a matter of determination. I need to see this, and I'm positioning myself so, okay, now I can see that, and then you can start cutting.
Yep.
All right? All right. Okay, so the central's coming along. The canine's going to have a little taper problem.
Yeah, I fixed it.
But look,
The medial side.
see, here's the angle you want here, right, on the facial. So your facial wall is not tapered correctly. So I'm going to come back to this taper and recut the facial wall all the way down to the shoulder, but at this taper. All the way to the shoulder. Don't have a different angle at the bottom. That's going to be an undercut for sure. So make sure you see the entire facial wall at exactly this taper all the way down to the shoulder. Then the secondary plane is going to be like this taper here. So that's what we're expecting on the facial. Your axe reduction at the shoulder is not too bad. But when people lean the burr outward in the mid-facial, they tend to lean the burr outward in the corners too. So you see you're getting an undercut between here and here. So make sure you have everything leaning axially. Make sure you keep the end of the burr at the margin so you don't get any ski jumps like this. So lean the burr.
How can we take the undercut?
Just lean the burr toward the axis and cut until the undercut goes away. So I just fixed the undercuts in 3 different places here. Mid-facial, distal facial, and mesial facial. And at the same time, we got rid of the ski jump over here. Okay, you've got the shoulder angled gingivally reasonably well. Okay, chamfer not too bad. I would taper more on the lingual. Let's make sure you choose your taper, look along the wall. So make sure you see the taper and the chamfer while you're doing it. I'm going to keep the end of the burr a little bit closer to the margin here. But make sure you see exactly where the end of the burr is. Okay, so we got some clearance. Incisal reduction, yeah, you probably have enough, but I'm going to go a little bit more. Just to sort of make an incisal edge there, and I'm going to come down this marginal edge a little bit more. But I think your lingual fossa is working okay, and of course we always have to check the incisal reduction and the clearance. Okay, on the central, we compare the taper to the adjacent tooth, so it should be exactly like this. See, at the bottom you started leaning the burr outward. So you have to recut the facial, recut the entire facial to the shoulder, just so I did on the canine. Okay, the axe reduction at the shoulder is pretty good here. A little weak over here, not too bad over here. So make sure the depth cuts in these embrasures are a full millimeter at the shoulder. Make sure you angle it gingivally a little bit better. Let's see. Yeah, I want to angle it gingivally a little more in this area. Yeah, I think I want to angle that shoulder a little bit better everywhere. And incisal reduction looks pretty good. Your clearance on the lingual, not enough obviously. You don't have any there. So redo the facial reduction, get that right, get the taper right, and then do the lingual reduction until you get clearance there. And your chamfers and tapers a little bit off. So look this way so you know that you're leaning the burr toward the axis, and you know you have the end of the burr at the margin. So you got to be looking along the wall so you can see exactly what you're doing all the way along here. So you see the taper, the axe reduction at the margin, the end of the burr at the margin, and the gingival position. So you got to make sure you see all 3 of those things wherever you are, and then you'll be in a little bit better control. Okay, so redo the facial, redo the shoulder angle on that one. Okay, coming along. Okay. Okay, so we're coming along on the central. That central, mesial distally, the taper is not real obvious. It's fairly parallel from one side to the other. I'd probably want to get a little more obvious convergence. But I also want to make sure that the margin's above the gingiva. You're going subgingival for some reason. And I want to make sure that the shoulder's angled gingivally. So slide the ball burnisher down. If it stops, if it slides off, then it's angled. If it stops, it's not angled. Slide it down where the chamfer is, and if it stops, it's a chamfer. If it doesn't, it's a ski jump. So you're tending to get ski jumps in a couple places, and you definitely haven't angled your shoulder. And over here, your shoulder is super heavy, isn't it? Or the chamfer is super heavy. So how did you get so deep? How did you cut so deep axially? Any idea?
So at one point my burr just slipped.
Well, of course, you've got a dozen points there where it's too heavy. So it didn't slip everywhere.
So then I was trying to correct it, and then I couldn't, and because I was moving burr differently.
You're removing the burr axially.
Yeah.
But the problem is you're too deep axially. You can't fix it by going deeper axially.
Right.
The only way to fix it is to is to keep the end of the burr at the margin. This is where the end of the burr should have been, right there, right?
Okay, so lingually, am I?
Anywhere. Lingually, proximally, the end of the burr must be at the surface of the tooth, must be at the margin. Then we get a nice little 1/2 millimeter chamfer. So over here, you're also way too heavy, huh?
Yeah.
This is more of a 1/2 millimeter chamfer here, but be careful about the taper. We talked about that. So make sure you see the end of the burr at the margin everywhere, wherever you are. But notice the way I'm using the mirror. I'm using the mirror so I can see along each of these walls. Okay, now it's difficult to use the mirror and the ball burnisher to hold the gingiva down. And we have to hold the gingiva down because you actually went too deep gingivally in some of these places. So, if you went too deep gingivally, it means you don't see where you are. If you go too deep axially, it means you don't see where you are. If you don't see the end of the burr at the surface, you don't see whether the end of the burr is at the surface or not, then you're overextended axially. So the chamfer should have been like this, and it's like 3 times that big, right? So those are the things we need to be really paying attention to. So looking along the wall, really a key thing. That's what makes the difference between a prep that works and one that doesn't. Okay, so let's, you have the diamond cleaning stone someplace?
Oh, yeah.
Ah, there we go. Okay. Okay, so on the shoulder, let's check the facial taper. Whoops. You have to have the teeth and the head tightened onto the flat area on the rod so they don't rotate. So remember there's a flat area there on the rod? That's where everything tightens. Okay, so let's take a look at the facial taper. So this should be the taper all the way to the shoulder, right? So this is where you make your depth cut. This angle right here. Middle third of the adjacent tooth, all the way to the shoulder. So you choose this angle and you cut until you get a shoulder. Just like when during a chamfer, you choose your taper and you cut until you get a chamfer. And we do the same thing over here. Lean the burr toward the axis and cut until you get a shoulder. We're going to connect together around here like this. But that taper that I just showed you how to do, we make sure we have that taper exactly like that all the way to the shoulder. Okay? So look how much you've under-reduced here because you had the wrong taper. Secondary plane is going to be like this up toward the incisal. So you're 1.5 millimeters under-reduced toward the top of this wall. So that's what happens when you don't make sure you have the perfect taper. That's why we're so careful to do those depth cuts exactly right. Okay? Now, let's take the ball burnisher. I have to hold the gingiva down to angle the shoulder because you're a little too close to the gingiva. Here you're okay. But see, you haven't angled the shoulder yet. So we do 3 depth cuts, join together, angle the shoulder. When you do the depth cuts, make sure you have the appropriate taper. And then make sure you have the right amount of axis-reduction at the shoulder, and then make sure the ball burnisher slides off the shoulder. Then we're good. So do the same thing over here on this side, but you don't have a 1 millimeter shoulder here. You need a 1 millimeter shoulder from here all the way around to there. And then a much smaller chamfer from here around to here. Okay, so incisor reductions, okay. Your lingual clearance is okay. But practice, finish up, redo the mesial side of the facial at the right taper. Because that's critical. If you don't get the right taper on the facial, it ruins the prep really, really fast. Okay, so work on those, and then in a few minutes I'm going to show everybody how to do the premolar occlusal reduction. All right. Okay, so let's see where we are here. Oops. Alright, so we worked on that canine. It's not too far off. Not over tapered mesial distally though, huh? Yeah, that's better than an undercut. But again, look along the wall so you can see the taper and see the end of the burr at the margin and see the gingival position all at the same time. Then you'll get a cleaner result. Okay, but we worked on that before, so let's see how the central is. So let me see. So we talked, I think I saw this before, didn't I? So the taper should be about like this. But see, at the bottom you went like this. Yeah, so now I don't remember seeing that before. So we've got to get the correct taper all the way down to the shoulder. Okay, that's why we make the depth cuts. So we take the taper from the middle third of the adjacent tooth and we make a depth cut at that angle all the way to the shoulder. And we keep that angle everywhere. And then we make a depth cut here. But you see, your axe reduction, you don't have a shoulder here at all. And over here it's pretty weak. So make the depth cuts as close as you can to the adjacent tooth. Here and here. And then when you make the shoulder uniform into that area, you'll have a nice uniform millimeter all the way around there. But again, you got a huge undercut at the gingival part of this wall. Okay, so here's how to see it. You can look this way, and you'll notice that you're leaning the burr away from the axis, so of course that's a big undercut. And that means if you're looking down the lingual or some other direction here, you can't see this wall and this wall at the same time because the walls are leaning away from each other. Now on the lingual, you see you have no cingulum, right?
Yeah.
You had the burr leaning like this. That's because you weren't looking this way. We always look along the walls. Whatever wall we're working on, we look along the wall. Then you can see your taper. Then you can see the axial reduction. You can see the end of the burr at the margin. You have to see those things. Okay? You've got to be looking along the wall here, along the wall here. Again, the mirror is the only way to do this. Without the mirror, you're lost. So make friends with the mirror as fast as you can. But if you're looking at the wall like this, everybody over tapers. Because you can't see the taper and you can't see the chamfer while you're doing it. Look along the wall and we can see both of those things, and that's what makes the biggest difference. Okay, now the other thing we're going to do is angle the shoulder. So whatever shoulder you have, we're going to angle the shoulder by leaning the shoulder diameter away from the wall and angle the shoulder right to the wall this way. So the ball burnisher will slide right off. Over here too. So right now your shoulder is kind of like this. You want to have it angled gingivally like this. So the ball burnisher slides off. So there's no chance of any undermined enamel being there. So angle the shoulder gingivally. That's a key part of the prep.
Is the shoulder width okay?
Is the axe reduction at the shoulder okay? Again, we don't care about the shoulder width at all. Remember, there's a big difference between the axe reduction at the shoulder and the width of the shoulder. We don't care about the width. We care about the axe reduction.
At the shoulder.
So we're going to look down here, and you're about, of course, you're undercut, so that made it heavier at the bottom. But you're about at 1.2 or 3 here. You have a millimeter, and here you have a millimeter, so that's good. Okay. The biggest problem is the undercut on the bottom part, on the gingival part of that facial wall.
And I have one more question. So you know how for the canine you told us that you see one is this plane and the other one is this plane.
Yeah,
like
it's for all the
2/3 and
teeth.
1/3.
That's for all the teeth.
For
All the teeth.
Incisor too.
Yeah, well, yeah, all the teeth. Premolars, molars, everything. You can take the taper from the middle third of the adjacent tooth and then check, put the burr against the incisal third of the adjacent tooth, and if there's something to cut at that angle, then we cut it. That's the secondary plane. We'll do the same thing over here on the central, matching the incisal third to the adjacent tooth here. But we really can't do that until we get that facial undercut fixed. Okay. Okay, so you're making some progress. You don't have much clearance there, do you? On the A-plane. So squeeze the typodont all the way down. So I'm going to have to equilibrate it for you tomorrow. Hopefully that's possible.
I think this typodont really needs to be in occlusion. I don't know.
Yeah, well, squeeze it. And then the only thing we can do now is squeeze it down.
Yeah.
But look how little clearance you have on the mesial side. And of course the ridge, like I was demonstrating, the ridge on the A-plane should be shifted way over here to the distal. Right? Remember how much I emphasized shifting the ridge distally? A long plane here to the marginal ridge and a short plane over here. So now the ridge is between the two opposing teeth. Then you can do the same thing on the B plane at this vertical angle. Down this way, and then down this way. But you should have come up about here, and then your C plane would be about like this. Okay, so, but you've got obviously more clearance than you need to have in those areas. Now, your shoulder is too small and your chamfer is too big. You actually have more axe reduction where you're going to have porcelain, or sorry, more axe reduction where you're going to have metal than you do where you're going to have gold or porcelain. Okay, so we're going to really make sure that we're careful to make sure we get 3 depth cuts, join together, angle the shoulder. You didn't angle the shoulder. You have such a small shoulder, it's hard to angle it. So make the depth cut again at this level, not so deep gingivally. Make depth cuts again over here and here. Then when you're doing the axe reduction, when you're doing the lingual, so your taper is probably a little bit too much. You could have had a taper about like this, so you're a little bit over taper. But the end of your burr is not quite at the margin. So whatever taper you want to use, stop when you see the end of the burr at the surface of the tooth. Okay? Then you'll have the perfect uniform chamfer. And then turn the patient to the right and look over the head of the handpiece on the upper left. So now I'm looking along the wall here, but look how tricky it is. Look at my position. You should photograph my position here. So I have the patient turned to the right, and I'm looking in the mirror over the head of the handpiece, but I can see along that wall. And look at the monitor now. Record the monitor so you can see what I'm seeing when I'm looking in this position. So record the monitor so you can see exactly what I'm seeing. And then along here as well. End of the burr at the surface, at the margin, all the way along there. So I'm going to let you continue through here, but keep the end of the burr at the margin and drop the margin gingerly, and you'll get through there all right. Then you'll have a nice uniform chamfer, and it won't be a ski jump. Okay, so that's the kind of thing we're working on learning today. And of course, make sure you have the burr leaning away from the adjacent tooth instead of toward it. Don't lean the burr into the adjacent tooth. Lean it so it's leaning axially. Leaning axially, don't be hitting the adjacent tooth like this. Keep the margin near the gingiva from the beginning all the way through. Make sure your facial cusp is 2 millimeters reduced compared to the adjacent teeth, so you need to reduce another millimeter or so. All right? And that's coming along though. You're getting a little more efficient as you're working. But again, you got to see those things. Okay. Oops, wait a minute. I got my mirror back. Where'd my mirror go? Thank you. Okay, you can't turn the patient 90 degrees to the right. 45 degrees to the right, 45 degrees to the left. That's okay. And we want the typodont and the mannequin head tightened on the flat area on the rod right here. That way it doesn't rotate unexpectedly. Okay, so get the mannequin set up right. Okay, so looking along this way, you're doing the PFM, but you have a damaged adjacent tooth. Here is close. A little bit, not quite enough though. Get a full millimeter from here around under there. And did you angle the shoulder? No, the ball burnisher doesn't slide off. So you didn't angle the shoulder. You skipped step 3 completely. So be careful about that. Okay, and then this looks like it's undercut. You're leaning the burr away from the axis. And the end of your burr is going inside the tooth, so that's likely to be a ski jump there. So again, when you're doing the lingual, look this way, get the taper you want, and then stop when the end of the burr is right there at the margin. Okay? When you come around from the lingual into the proximal, you can look over the handpiece this way. Okay? So if you have your handpiece like this, notice the position I'm in. I'm looking over the head of the handpiece into the mirror. See that? There's the handpiece. I'm leaning over. I'm looking over the handpiece into the mirror. So I can see the taper and the gingival position and the axial wall, and the axial reduction. You have a little ski jump right over here on the mesiolingual. Can you see it in the monitor? Little ski jump right there. Okay. So go through from the lingual looking in that direction. You can get the taper. You can do some from the facial, you can do some from the lingual, but again, learn how to work from the lingual in the mirror. That's a huge advantage. Okay, so you can make the ridges a little bit more defined. You don't have much of a ridge on the B plane here, so come down this way and come down this way. Just like over here. Come down to the mesial side, come down to the distal side. Now over here, you're starting out pretty well in terms of making a ridge, but it's probably not in the right position, and look how horizontal it is. So your central groove is way over toward the lingual. Okay, the central groove should be more like about here. So make these planes a little more vertical. Shift the ridge a lot more to the distal. See that? Here's the space between the opposing teeth. Put the ridge there. And make it a lot more vertical. Get the central groove in the right place. So use your 837 and you can do that just fine. But make 2 flat planes with a more reasonable vertical angle. But again, you're working against a damaged adjacent tooth. Okay, and then make the C plane come all the way around like this eventually. Okay, so a little more care about fitting the occlusal anatomy to the opposing teeth. Tomorrow we'll learn a lot more about how to do that as we do the, as we do the molars. Okay? But yeah, so, you've got to learn how to avoid hitting the adjacent tooth.
Okay.
Over here you had the burr leaning toward the adjacent tooth. And of course, you didn't have to worry about hitting the adjacent tooth because you still had a prep on it. Because you're not able to see in the right direction, so for part of it, you just look this way. So you can use direct vision for part of it. Take the taper from the adjacent tooth, and then, again, keep the end of the burr at the margin. Right, just like I did a few minutes ago. And then when you come around the corners, that's when you have to use the mirror to look along this direction. So you can see the taper and the chamfer, and then look along this direction so you can see the taper and the chamfer. But it is easier to look over the handpiece if your burr is shorter, so that's why the 877 is helpful. But that's why I was illustrating. So you need to sit down and try to do it exactly the way I was doing it. It'll take some practice to look in the mirror over the handpiece, but it's going to be way better for you in the long run. Okay, so you're doing a premolar over here. Alright, you've got the ridges fit into the opposing teeth pretty well. Okay, you had some ski jumps which you fixed, right? On the mesial and the distal?
Okay, mesial and distal.
So I'm seeing that you have like almost like a little shoulder bevel here.
I tried to fix.
Yeah, so you had a big ski jump, and then you have almost a little bevel on the edge of your ski jump. Now, it should not be quite that obvious that you had to fix it, but this will be more acceptable than having the ski jump, that's for sure. The shoulder, not very much. You're about 0.7 here. Let's get a full millimeter axial reduction at the shoulder. You're closer here. You're about 0.8, 0.85, and over here about 0.75. So make sure you get a full millimeter at the bottom, looking that way. And then make sure when you use the ball burnisher that it slides off the shoulder. It's not seeming to slide off the shoulder. You're actually making what's called a shoulder bevel here. It should be just a simple angled shoulder like this, But you have a horizontal shoulder and then you bevel it instead of angling it. So we really want to angle that shoulder. And by the way, when you're correcting a chamfer, like on the distal here, let's see if I can get this burr in a little farther. Yeah, a little bit. So when you're correcting the chamfer, to make it not a ski jump anymore, drop gingerly a little more. Drop that margin, then raise it a little bit. We're going to make something that looks a little bit more like a heavy chamfer, but at least it's not a ski jump. And over here, so you sort of had a ski jump and then you made a bevel, but now shape that prep a little bit so you have a nice gingival slope. This is a little bit more like a full ceramic chamfer, a heavy chamfer.
Yeah, it's more than 0.5.
Yeah, so again, as long as you keep the end of the burr at the margin, you're guaranteed of a beautiful chamfer. Okay, and your taper here, you're close. But make sure it's exactly that taper right to the shoulder, then secondary plane there. Then make sure you have 2 millimeters reduction on the facial cusp. It's less than that right now. So we want to make sure we have a full 2 millimeters reduction on that facial cusp. And when you're angling the shoulder, you go ahead and use your shoulder diamond. So we're going to lean the burr this way and angle the shoulder gingerly. Now, we might have to hold the gingiva down. And this gingiva is probably a little stiff. So angle the shoulder gingerly all the way into the embrasure where it joins the chamfer. And then over here, angle it this way. So don't angle it too much. Don't make it too steep, or it's like a bevel, and that's too steep for a PFM on the facial surface. Okay. So anyway, you're not too far off. You got the right idea about the occlusal, but yeah, you've got more of a full ceramic prep than a PFM.
Yeah.
So keep working on those chamfers and try to get to the point where you're keeping the chamfers a little more like this. That's a nice 1/2 millimeter chamfer. Okay, so most of you are coming along. You can convert the central into a PFM and I'll look at it tomorrow morning.
Central into the PFM.
Yeah, convert the central to a PFM. So just make heavier chamfers. Now you want to. I'm kicking your chair to get you out of the way.
You will be coming around, so
Oh, I try to change it up every once in a while. Okay, so let's see. Let's tighten your head a bit. Oh, that's why it doesn't tighten, because the flat area is over here. So now tighten the screw on the flat area, and then it won't wiggle around all the time. It'll make your life a lot easier. Oops. Thank you. Getting in there. Slowly but surely I'm getting in the habit. We'll see. Okay, so we got a premolar over here. Okay, so I need to have you shift the ridges more to the distal. So you've got a ridge about right here, but the two opposing teeth, the space between them is over here. So you got more clearance than you need over here and not enough over on this side. So shift it over and you'll get the same clearance on both sides. That'll work. You have not quite enough over here. I mean, really the 1.5 end should fit everywhere for a PFM or an all ceramic. So if you shift the ridges more to the distal and then come down this way, you'll get more clearance on the mesial side. That'll be helpful. Okay, the ox reduction of the shoulder, 0.8, 0.7, 0.6, not 1. And what about angling the shoulder gingerly? It's angled here, but not here, and definitely not in this area. Shoulder should be angled this way, and this one's kind of coming up like that. So that won't work. And then it looks like you're trying to get a ski jump over here, doesn't it? So why don't we just use the chamfer burr a little bit more carefully. And make sure you get the burrs in the right holes.
Yeah.
But you can look from the facial and do some of the chamfer. I can even angle the shoulder with the chamfer burr. It creates a rounded internal line angle. And so that would be okay for even a full ceramic. But make sure when you come around, the end of the burr is at the surface, at the margin, right there. Don't let it get inside here. You can look from the lingual and do the same thing. On the upper right, it's pretty easy to look from the lingual in the mirror because I'm looking past the head of the handpiece. On the upper left, I have to look over the head of the handpiece, and that's trickier. It takes a little more practice. But again, whatever you do, you have to see where the end of the burr is relative to the surface at all times. So always looking along the wall, always seeing where you are gingivally and where you are relative to the gingiva and where the end of the burr is relative to the surface. You would expect to have more of a C plane around here. So A, B, and C. And we want 2 millimeters reduction on the facial cusp, and you have that. But watch your tapers, watch your chamfers. Okay? All right, so you can convert this one to a full ceramic, and I'll take a look at it in the morning.
Okay, then.
Cool.
Which one? Oh, sorry.
Central.
Central?
Yep. Oops. Need a rubber band. Okay. Sure. Okay. So, good try so far. The shoulder is not wide enough, though, is it? You don't have enough axe reduction here. It's only 0.5, 0.5, 0.6 or 7. So that's why we make the depth cuts so carefully. So don't mess around with those depth cuts. Make sure you have the right taper matching the middle third of the adjacent tooth. So your taper is a little bit off. Make sure you have the right taper all the way down to the shoulder. And then make sure you make good depth cuts at the line angles. So you have enough axe reduction right into the line angle there and right into the line angle here. Get a nice uniform 1 millimeter axe reduction at the shoulder from here around to there. Then you can angle the shoulder gingerly. Angle it all the way to the axial wall by looking along the wall in each area. So now the facial reduction is okay. That's what we're looking for. Now your chamfer is a little heavy. If the chamfer is even a little heavy, you might have a little ski jump. And a little ski jump is like a little undercut or a little acute angle. It's more than a little problem. So be careful about your taper. I'd probably taper a little bit more, but make sure the end of the burr stays at the margin all the time. If the end of the burr is always at the margin, you always have a beautiful 0.5 millimeter chamfer. So look this way along the wall in the mirror. You can look past the head of the handpiece on the upper right. It's pretty easy to look past the head of the handpiece into the mirror. Get a little more taper, but keep the end of the burr always, always, always at the margin. Make sure you see the end of the burr at the margin all the time. I could drop a little more gingivally on the lingual. But again, make sure your end of the burr is always right there at the margin, then you'll be fine. Okay, and so you got I would probably make a little more definite C plane, kind of like this. On the lingual, you're going to take your taper from the adjacent tooth. You can do that just like we always do. Oops. So there's the taper. So your taper is pretty good, but your chamfer wasn't close enough to the gingiva to get a tall enough wall. Secondary plane will be about like this. So 2/3, 1/3 secondary plane, then the C plane like that. Okay, and that normally works out pretty well. Okay, so you can go back around those chamfers again and practice up a little bit. You're going to take this one and convert it to an all ceramic crown that I'll look at tomorrow morning.